Hi, Brett Keirstead. Thanks for being with me today.
Sure. Happy to be here.
So, everybody, Brett Keirstead is the new author. He was just published in March of this year, 2020. We are all salespeople. 5 steps to fulfilling relationships and improved communication at home, school, and work.
That's right.
So, Brett's very impressive because he's been working in corporate sales his entire career, 30 years, C-suite executives, making big deals, making lots of money uh, for himself and other people and companies. And what he's done with this book is take sales principles. He wants to take the things that he's learned, and he's studied a lot about professional sales, into the world and to improve communications and relationships with people, especially in the current environment, not necessarily COVID, but our current political environment and et cetera. So I asked Brett to come and share with you a little bit about the process of writing this book, because it was a unique process for writing. And then I want to ask you, Brett, a little about your writing habits now, because you're a really prolific writer.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
Brett, will you tell us about how you got this book written?
Sure. Sure. So about 2 years before, 2.5 years or so ago, I kind of started, the ideas were percolating on what I wanted to do. And I always thought at some point I would want to write a book or really capture my thoughts in that type of long form content where I could kind of, I don't know, tell the story in that type of format. And so what I started to do actually was I had about a 30-minute commute to work every day. And I started just voice talking pretty much every day, both directions, on subjects that I thought might someday make it into a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would just be rambling talk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just whatever the idea was, I tried to just spit it out into words. And, I used Google Voice,
Mm-hmm.
and it was awful. It was hardly a sentence at times. And sometimes I would get full paragraphs and sometimes I would get sound bites. And
Mm-hmm.
I, over the course of a while, and it ultimately made itself into about a 60,000 words of, I would dare call it a manuscript, but it was
Okay.
60 words worth of organized and together ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, well, I feel like I had enough content, but I had absolutely no organization and no idea how to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I decided to do at that time was one of your other authors, Dr. DeLong, Peggy DeLong, I called her up and I said, what should I do?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the suggestions she had was to talk to a ghostwriter. And I said, well, I've written so much. I mean, why that? And she said, well, just check it out and see. And they come in all different types.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up working with a ghostwriter who took a lot of what I did and turning it into a book. So there was a big difference, as you know, Laura, between content and a book.
Mm-hmm.
You could write a casual blog and be interesting, and
Mm-hmm.
then translate into an actual book that someone might purchase, that would sit on a bookshelf and be read in logical format. So I knew I had a good idea.
Mm-hmm. And the idea was to take these 5 sales principles.
Yeah, at the
Or,
time I didn't have, it wasn't even organized that way. It was really just a bunch of stories about different skills at the time, different stories in sales that related to personal life. So I would say something like, well, if you're going to get somebody to go on a date, you got to tell them I'm going on a date.
mm-hmm.
I hadn't really thought, so that was logical. That was kind of the examples, like, well, there you can use those skills. Or, obviously in the last few years, political vitriol, a lot of things have been kind of rough. And I'm like, God, these people don't know how to communicate. If they just use sales skills,
Mm-hmm.
they could do a better job. And
Mm-hmm.
so those became the stories, but they weren't organized into 5 specific things that followed a flow with any structure to it. So
Okay.
that emerged because I had help.
Mm-hmm.
in that regard.
And is that why you chose these ghostwriters? Because you needed help, you wanted help, you were a working professional, you didn't have time? I mean, what were some of the things that went into you choosing to use a ghostwriter?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I mean, I had a full-time job and I still have a full-time job. This
Mhm.
is really something that I wanted to do as a passion, that's setting myself up for when I call it my work life is done. When I'm done with my jobs and I get to my future, I want to be able to work with organizations, whether they be schools or youth organizations or businesses, or I'm not sure what.
Mhm.
Needed a framework for that. And so I wanted to do it on the side. I don't anticipate that it would replace a job anytime soon in that regard.
Mhm.
So that way I could do it on the side. I also didn't, as you know, and we can talk about it as we get to the publishing cycle,
Mhm.
also didn't have a hard and fast time frame,
Mhm.
which was a blessing and a curse, right? The blessing side is I never felt extraordinary pressure, but the curse is that you could let it lapse.
Mhm.
And there was some lapses in the time frame. So the reason why I did is the reason why I wanted to work with somebody was, one, I wanted to do it part-time. I couldn't dedicate it full-time to it. I didn't have the experience, but I wanted to get it done. I wanted somebody to hold me accountable,
Mhm.
that had experience in the process.
Yeah. And you could do that with a writing coach too, but she didn't suggest that to you. It was a
Well,
ghostwriter, but you didn't
I,
want to
well,
write
I
it.
didn't, I didn't, I didn't really know the difference. You know
Uh-huh.
what I mean? At the time, I just kind of started and I said, well, here's my circumstance. And then I
Mhm.
just looked around. A friend of mine had recommended to go to like, I can't remember the name of the site, like freelance sites,
Mhm. Mhm.
freelance writing. And when I looked at that, it didn't feel personal enough. Like I felt like I would have to participate way too much.
Yeah.
What I liked about my ghostwriters was um, they had all the content. And
Mhm.
so a lot of it was just interviewing me.
Yep.
Like it would just talk to me, transcribe it, you know the story, but it was so helpful because I
Yeah.
could just talk.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, and it's,
uh,
I work as a ghostwriter sometimes too. It's not the primary thing that I do, and it's very time intensive because a ghostwriter is writing a book, right? And I'm
yes,
running a business. And so the difference between a writing coach and a ghostwriter is I'm coaching you and holding you accountable and helping you to write your book. But what I'm hearing
right.
from you, and what I actually recommend for a lot of working professionals who have a career, I don't think you just have a job. That's how you actually have a
Fair
sales
enough.
career, and it takes a lot of time. Plus you're a father, I'm a youth sports coach,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you didn't have the time to devote to the book, but you have a lot of expertise. You have a passion, as you said, and you have an idea. So the ghostwriters could help you execute on that. And you really are the source of the ideas and the content. They're shaping it. They're asking your questions. They're trying to draw things out. That's what I do as a ghostwriter, and then having it transcribed. And then they're taking that, and then they likely pass back and forth versions, drafts
Yes.
of their writing, and you said yes, no, etc.
Right. And
And
we would
how
debate it, and we
oh
would go back and forth, and they would say, we went through it too. Like, what do you mean by this? Like,
yeah,
well, what I mean, like, oh, okay. So maybe we would go through multiple revisions,
yeah.
just to make sure we got the idea right.
So how many years did you take to do that before your manuscript got to me as a
I
publisher?
would say the whole process from like the first recording to when it got to you was a little over 2 years.
Okay, well, and
And I
that's
would
not
say
that bad.
no, no, no. And there was probably maybe a 6 month gap in there when I
Mhm.
kind of got it done.
Mhm.
One version of it before I went to you. When I had finished with the ghostwriters, I had something that I felt, you remember with the state you got it in. It was on its way. It
Yeah,
it it was a little bit more mature than just a regular,
definitely.
but there was definitely work that needed to be done to clean it up. And so there was probably a 6 month gap between when they finished and I got to you, just because I knew the rest was going to be, I hate to say this, but the tedious part of it.
Uh-huh.
You know, it was easy to just create and talk, and that was fun. But turning it into a professional book, which you did, I knew was going to be more. It was going to be more of like a grind it through process. Like we got to
Uh-huh.
get down nitty gritty details to get
Yeah.
it right.
And
So
that's what, when I accepted the manuscript, I felt like it was in really good shape. And when I got farther into the manuscript, there were definitely things that I could see that needed more work or more
yeah,
thinking through, and some of the order of how you would position yourself as an expert, and what I saw, like this part needs to go here. And so we had
yeah,
that. And then there were things that I said, I think you need to either massage this or just delete it. So even in
yeah,
that editing, proofreading process. So your book, from the time I got it to the time we published it, I think it was about 6 months, where it
yeah,
could, if it
yep.
was just publishing, it would have been 4 months, but we added a couple of months because we did some editing. So,
I do have one other thing I would say about the process. So originally I thought I was going to work with a traditional publisher, like a
mm,
publishing house.
mhm,
And so when I got to the end of the process of writing the manuscript and the book proposal and everything was ready,
mhm.
I started to do some work. Like I started emailing I got the list and I got some people to,
Queries, you were querying.
yeah, I was doing the query. Thank you. That was the word. I was doing
Mhm,
some queries, and it just, I realized that if I was going to do that, I needed to do it full time. Like it needed to be a commitment and it was going to be long. And I was like, I don't know, I didn't necessarily want that. As you know, I'm not in this for the money. I certainly want to have success.
mhm.
But I really am trying to build a foundation. And so when Peggy recommended me then to you, it was such a good fit for what ultimately how I wanted it to turn out, because you kind of sat in the middle, right? You're like you were exactly the fit for the way that I wanted to get this to market.
Mhm.
Um, Especially once I learned more about both my time, my commitment, and what I needed to be successful. So
Yeah.
I think as other people might want to get into this, it really is worth looking around for the different types of assistance you can get,
Mhm.
because not one fits all in that
Yeah.
regard.
I'm what I refer to as a hybrid publisher or
Yes,
indie publisher. So I care about the quality of the manuscript. I'm not going to just publish anything, which traditional publishers are not going to just publish anything.
right,
And you're still paying me to do the work,
right.
but I don't take any royalties or rights, which is
That's
what
right.
a traditional publisher is doing. So that's why I think it's also a good fit for an entrepreneur or a business professional who just wants to get their message out and in print
Yes,
and in a quality form so that they can be proud of it, be confident about the quality of the work, and get behind it and get their message out. And really, that's the way the world is going. So
that's right.
my goal as a publisher is for you and readers not to be able to tell the difference between whether it was traditionally or independently published and assisted published. But if you DIY it, you're going to be able to see it's DIY'd.
Yes.
So, Brett, I want you to talk also just very briefly, because you are quite a prolific writer. I'm actually really impressed and bowled over by how much you actually write. I mean, I think
Thank
you
you.
really love to write.
I do.
And so you have this blog. Tell us what are your writing habits? What are your writing process, just very briefly?
Yeah. I the blog itself. So obviously, because I'm in business and sales, you do a lot of sales writing. That's been my career, and I've always enjoyed writing longer content.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, obviously, if you look at LinkedIn or Facebook or any social media, you're really somewhat constrained a little bit in how deep you can go into an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, those are single ideas. You kind of get them out there, and then you assume people will move on. I have a hard time doing that. I love writing and exploring an idea,
Mm-hmm.
and often it turns into like multiple threads of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So the blog is fun in that way, in that you and I kind of joked about it. You're like, you write so long, and I'm like, I know. As long as I'm not repeating myself, and as long as I feel like ideas are building upon themselves, I don't mind. I self-critique my blogs, and I ask myself, am I rambling on? Like,
Uh-huh.
am I repeating things that I already said? But it feels very expressive to me to write that so I can explore an idea.
Do
And
you have
I
anybody edit your blogs?
no,
Mm-hmm.
I don't. And in fact, what's interesting is I will say I like this COVID-19 thing. I just put one out this week,
Mhm.
Actually had written a blog, and I read it and I'm like, wow, this is super clever. It was really interesting. It was the contrast between me and we, how we're making decisions that that are good for we, but may not be good for me,
Mhm.
and how we'll all be good. We will be good as humans, but me may not be good in this situation,
Mhm.
right? It's like, and I read it and I read it,
What's
and
an
I
example of that? Use toilet
well,
paper as an example.
no, I mean, I kind of made the comment. I didn't publish this because at the end of it, I felt, you know how it is, Laura, in some of my writing, I was worried. I don't want it to be too controversial where people miss the point,
Mhm.
and it didn't feel like it came together in a way that was like I would want people to get the right message out of it. It's so hard right now,
Mhm.
to sometimes do that. But so like me versus we, so we as humans will be great. Like we'll survive.
Mhm.
We'll go on. But the smaller the we gets, so I kind of wrote Tom Hanks got sick and I'm sad. You know,
Mhm.
he's part of the we humans, right?
Mhm.
I know him, you know him. But like if my wife were sick or my
Mhm.
kids were sick, it would be devastating. So
Yeah.
that's a we that's very small. We as a family or we as coworkers. The odds of us are smaller, but the impact is higher.
Yeah.
If you look at we the world, I know Tom Hanks, I mean I don't know him, but
Mhm.
like so I know somebody in the world, we are all impacted, but the smaller it gets, the more impactful, but the less likely. And so do you go outside and maybe you're not going to get sick, me,
Mhm.
but I'm impacting we, because when I come home, I impact the we, but I'm also impacting the bigger we
Mhm.
because I'm spreading it. So it's just how do you make decisions around that? That was what it was about. It was so hard though. It was so
Yeah.
hard.
And then you wrote a blog though about tell me the title of it because it was
The the
clever itself.
the one I just did,
Yeah. What was the
the one I
title?
just published. Oh, yeah, it's conserve, maintain, and grow.
Yeah.
Really how we look at the decisions we make in any kind of adverse situation.
Mhm.
It's strategy and how we go about dealing with adversity.
Yeah. And I think that what I love about what you do, Brett, all the time, and you did this in your book and you do this in your blogs, and I think you do it in your life, is that you apply these principles not only then to the work world, but to your own family. So
Yeah.
the conserve, maintain, grow is something, oh, sorry, that's us to stop. um, this is your time. I'm cutting you off right now, but I'm not because I have more questions. So you do a great job of seeing how these principles that you live your life by or that you've thought through writing that you've discovered and that you've been using all along at work, how they also apply in your family and out in your communities. And that's what I admire about your writing and your thinking about them repeatedly. I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, I never thought of it that way. And I mean, you've taught me when I've read some of your blogs about leadership and helped me think about leadership and have me apply it in areas in which I'm a leader in my personal life and my work life. So I recommend this book and your blogs because of that. So I want to ask you a couple of questions to wrap up here just a little bit. What do
Okay.
you think? I know your book hasn't been out for just 2 months. What have been a couple of the biggest benefits that you've gotten from actually crossing the finish line,
Yes.
getting this in people's hands, having the name author?
Yeah.
Uh, what have been a couple of the biggest benefits so far?
Well, I've been invited to I've been invited to speak at a variety of different events because sometimes they're corporate events, sometimes they're sales related events. I've been asked to talk to like groups of high school students and college students and sports teams. And the vision that I had always had for this, as you know, Laura, was to transcend sales, to transcend corporate. There's enough money spent in the world on corporate training,
Mhm.
like people, business professionals, there's a gazillion dollars and gazillions of programs on that. But
Mhm.
this group here that's, I don't want to call them disenfranchised. They're just not, because they don't pay a lot of money. They're not corporate. You know, a lot of people are talking to these guys, kids, teenagers, young adults. They're not learning communication skills. They're learning basic standardized tests and then get to work,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whatever they need to do. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy that it worked. Like, our plan to get to that group worked. The reviews that I've seen online are like, oh, great for students. I've gotten direct messages. I've been asked to speak. So it's expanded my horizons of who
Your influence, your circle of
my
influence.
influence, which
Mhm.
has been awesome. I mean, it's not economics that, I mean, I'm not in it for the economics. It's just fulfilling. Like, that's who I wanted to reach, and it's
Mhm. That's awesome.
been really fulfilling
Yeah, and I think
already, you know.
yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen with my authors and any authors is that things come up too that are surprising, that are going to happen for you that you could never have
Yeah.
anticipated, and it's because you have um, a book in written
Yes.
form. And I think that that's true for people who write LinkedIn articles and blogs too. You've got to get out there. You've got to be
Yeah.
speaking, but it really gives you credibility because it takes something to write a quality book that people want to read and recommend. You know, they
Yeah.
would want to buy it. So I commend you for it. Now,
Thank you.
a couple of final things. So if somebody wants to go from writing blogs and LinkedIn articles, they want to become a speaker, they want to have influence, they may want to grow their business that way, or they may not. They may be like you. This is my second career after my corporate career. I'm
Yep.
looking towards how I want to make a difference in the world. What are two pieces of advice that you would give them? They should know this before starting to write a book. What would you tell
Yeah,
them?
I would say first and foremost is just get started in any form. Momentum builds upon itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessary to have the vision of the final product before you get started.
Oh,
I think
that's great.
that's the one thing. Like, just start anything. Like I said, just recording in my car,
Mm-hmm.
right? Talking in by myself,
Mm-hmm.
saying some stuff, and sometimes laughing at myself. Like, that was the stupid. I like recording. That was the stupidest thing you've ever said. You know, just, it doesn't matter. Just creating momentum for yourself is number one. And
Okay.
especially in a situation like me where you don't have a deadline. When you don't have a deadline, it's amazing how much more enjoyable the process is.
Mm.
So start in any form or fashion: scribbling, writing, talking, recording. Don't worry about the finished product. That'll come later.
Okay.
That was number one. And then the second thing is, I'll combine this into two. Don't be afraid to get help, whether that's a ghostwriter, a sociopath, whatever mechanism. And the thing I will say about that, both you, Laura, and my team in ghostwriting, one of the best things about working with you guys is you're not me. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you're not like-minded. So you're, in the sense that you would have a different perspective. You know, I kind of like, my ghostwriters were 70-year-old women that were like hippies in LA. Awesome. Because we would have funny, I mean, we would funny things. They'd say, Brett, you're not writing to 50-year-old white men. You know what I mean?
To yourself.
Oh, I forget.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? That's right.
Yeah.
I'm not the audience. So whoever you work with, don't be afraid to get somebody that thinks differently than you.
That's great advice.
The finished product will end up being something that has much more appeal and is much more clever and useful. Unless you're the audience. I mean, like, obviously, if I'm writing to myself, I would do it, but that's not me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not writing to myself. I'm writing to people almost that come from a different, you know, like we said, a different audience. And so I would highly recommend working with people that don't share exactly your same background, so you don't get groupthink. That would probably be those two items for sure.
I think that's great. And I think, you know, we often do write for people who are like us. And at the same time, people who don't think like us give us access to our blind spots.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's also why everybody needs an editor, because it is true that I teach and work with authors to anticipate readers' needs, to anticipate readers' resistance to your message. Where would they be doing that? Where would they be confused? There's just so much you can anticipate as an author before you need to actually get beta readers editors and people to show you and tell you where you're confusing people, where you've left things out. And all of us need it, including me. And so that's great advice, Brett. This
Yeah. Can
is,
I add one? I know we're over, but I got to give
that's
you one
okay.
piece of
That's
credit.
okay.
One of the, as you know, one of the most spectacular feelings of the whole thing was when Jana put the artwork together. Like I can't, like that, when the work that getting somebody,
My book designer.
the book designer,
Yeah.
the integration of the book design with the content,
Mm-hmm.
seeing it like that was so rewarding. And having her work closely with you and understand the background and the story helped so much create the matching, the visuals that brought it together. Like that, I can't also, I mean, I also have to add that as point number 3. Like that was so rewarding to get that piece of it done well.
Mm-hmm.
Not minimize that, because that makes it all come together.
That's awesome. And I know that Jana will love to hear that, because she is a book designer, and other book designers I've worked with, like Melinda Tipton Martin, they really do add value
Yes.
to this product and make it professional, help it communicate, help you sell what you're selling so that your message can get out there. And I think that that's true also for you as a writer. It's fulfilling to
Yes.
see it
Yeah.
like this instead of on a Word document, which is boring.
Absolutely.
This is typography. This image, we did a lot of work with this to try to communicate diversity
Yes.
and inclusion, which
That's
is an
right.
important value of yours. And it does it visually in one moment. So I'm really pleased with that. And I look forward to her hearing this from you directly.
Good.
This has been really, really valuable, I think, Brett. Thank you for being you, and
Of course.
thank you for your message, and thanks for taking time to do this.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Anytime. And
All
I'm
right.
sure we'll go along if we do it again.
Yep. Okay.
Always do.
I might do a coaching session with you so I can coach you to write shorter
Right.
or more succinct.
That's right.
I will never be critical of anybody who actually writes long form.
Yes. Well, I appreciate everything. Thank you for everything you did, Laura.
You're welcome.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.